Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss one of the economic implications of both the lockdown and coming out of the lockdown that are not only not really being reported widely in the UK, but also coming as something of a massive surprise to most. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So let's begin with what a lot of people think is the actual relationship between the economy and the pandemic before we show how inherently wrong it is. So the attitude in the UK seems to be that the economy has tanked because we went into lockdown and that it would immediately improve if we ended it. Yes, people understand that ending it early means sacrificing lives, but some people think that the economy is more important, or they may believe that more people may die of other things as a result of the lockdown, whatever it is. Now, not going to get into the morals of the situation here, because the problem is that the fundamental belief on a practical level is actually wrong, and Sweden has helped to prove it. But first, the economic speculation that has stopped Boris Johnson easing the lockdown, because on a fundamental level, Boris Johnson is not much different to the guys in charge of either the USA or Brazil. He hates the lockdown. He hates everything about it. His upbringing is absolutely raging at the idea that, he, the great Boris Johnson, has ordered the state to clamp down on people's freedoms. Conservatives may be defined in many ways, but at the core of their principles is the belief that the state should not interfere in the way people wish to live their lives. Survival of the fittest in a capitalist sense. With a very few exceptions, there are a few rules they sort of agree to, like not murdering, and if you must steal, could you really just steal from the poor, please? So the idea that his own government has told people to stay indoors, to limit the amount of exercise they can do, not to visit areas of the countryside for recreation, that this government is paying millions of people to stay at home and not work, this must be eating him up inside. And it's not hard to see why half the party's MPs are raging about the lockdown still being in place. Were it up to them, it would be gone already. But Johnson has been advised that the economic assumptions that are being made are wrong. We started off believing in what Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, called the V-shaped recovery. GDP goes down during the lockdown. Of course, there's a load of people at home not being that productive. But as soon as you ease the lockdown, it bounces straight back up immediately. This is no longer the thinking at the Treasury. They understand now that businesses will have gone under and work cannot just pick up where it left off, that there will be a lag. Those who lost their jobs will not be able to get new ones immediately, is what the Chancellor is now saying. So that is the economic theory at the moment holding sway at the Treasury. But there is another issue. So if the lockdown were just eased now, as many are calling for, the virus hasn't gone away. That's still there. That is still there. So the infection rate would go up again. People would become sick. That means a lot of people would be unable to work and productivity goes back down. And when you've got businesses who can't cope with that level of illness, that business still goes under. So you still have an economic cost of easing the lockdown too early. And then, of course, if your infection rate goes completely out of control, which would be easily done, then you may have to go back into another lockdown. So your total amount of lockdown can end up being far greater than it would be if you just did one lockdown for the right amount of time. So this is what is being reported to be staying Boris Johnson's hand, in addition, of course, to his fears for the NHS actually being overwhelmed. But Brexit has shown how this works. There's no point in experienced economists saying what would happen if A, B and C are done. The Brexit mentality holds that the only people who can see the future are the fish-faced charlatans who stand on beaches shouting at the sea. Oh, they can tell us what the future's going to be like. It's going to be brilliant. But actual experts, no, they can't tell us what's going to happen tomorrow. But as I said, Sweden have actually shown us some interesting insights. And this isn't a prediction for the future. This is what has actually happened in real time. So Sweden did not instigate a lockdown. And for all the Swedes who think this has sort of worked, it is interesting that they have a way, way higher death rates than their Nordic neighbours. But it's what they did. So no lockdown measures means they didn't kick the hell out of their economy, right? The way the Conservatives would see it is they sacrificed lives for the economy. Very prudent, very sensible. Well, no, not exactly, because although there was no lockdown, the actual Swedish population aren't as thick as us Brits, so they would adopt measures by being advised them. Because remember how it worked in the UK. Boris Johnson advised certain measures. He didn't want to force it because, you know, his Conservative upbringing. And then people just went, no. And so he went, right, you didn't do what I advised, so now I'm ordering you to. But in Sweden, you know, a lot of people have followed the advice. They've socially distanced. Some businesses have closed anyway. Many have simply been unable to do business because Sweden has a very heavy export-orientated economy. Not as dependent on exports as the UK. So actually, you know, if you're trying to think, oh, well, Sweden's a different case then, well, it would be worse for the UK. We depend on exports much more than Sweden. So under the same conditions, we'd have fared even more badly. The bottom line is that Sweden's economy has suffered despite the lack of lockdown. And you might think to yourself, yeah, there's bound to be a bit of a dip. But it won't have suffered as much, will it? No. It has suffered just as much as comparable European countries who did go into lockdown. Just as much. So whatever, you know, benefits people may think Sweden gained from not imposing the lockdown, it wasn't an economic boost because they didn't get that. They didn't get any saving to their economy at all. And contrast this with what Boris Johnson was saying just a short while ago, before we went into lockdown, when he was ridiculing countries going into lockdown in Europe, and he said the world needed one country to stand up and show another way of doing things. He tried to draw some Clark Kent Superman type analogy, and he intended that country to be the UK, of course. But that's not what actually happened. It was actually Sweden. And the Conservatives' belief should absolutely hold that Sweden would have made out like bandits while all the idiots were hunkering down. But the reality is, there is no way to shelter from the economic storm. The slump would have happened anyway, and removing the lockdown now could lead to a worse economic depression later on. Indeed, the world's most eminent economists are warning that the British government, who seem to be fair much more seized of the economic realities than the bulk of the Conservative Party, are still massively underestimating the economic problems that are coming. And if we make our models based on too optimistic a forecast, we are bollocksed. Because imagine it like this. So you have an income, I hope, at the moment. So you have an income, and it allows you outgoings, and it allows you some money to spend on hobbies and other interests and savings, whatever you allocate funds for. Now imagine that you knew that wage was fine for the next year, but that in 12 months' time you knew your income would halve. Would that change your spending habits now? Of course it would. And the same would be true of the Treasury. If they overestimate the strength of the economy over the next few years, they will waste even more public money on billionaire offshore accounts than even they would were their models more realistic. But there it is. The economic reality is not as simple as many Conservatives would seem to think. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.